Hello everybody, this is a follow-up to the round 2 of the Most from the Least series of videos. A bunch of wonderful comments and questions came in as usual from you all. And so I thought I would take a moment and answer some questions, highlight some great comments, all that usual stuff. This one is going to be just for that one episode. There was enough that came in where we can sort of like keep it contained to just that. There's a handful of other questions about other episodes that have come up. I'll keep that in, another round of answering questions. So here we go. This is all just Most from the Least, round 2, questions, comments. Here we go. Okay, first one is from username or name Matthew Pauling. And it says, I wonder if you would consider making a video showing how you mix from the beginning of a session, highlighting how you mix into your compression and non-compression buses. I'd be happy to do that. The way it happened on this one was a little bit unique. I've done things similar to that, but not nearly to that degree. And I really liked it, and I'm definitely going to incorporate that more. And so I would be happy to do a video that dives deeper and just sort of focuses more on that. And then it would be super helpful to witness your process on gain staging and overall balance from the ground up. Yeah, I mean, this has been coming up a lot. I'm totally into it. I definitely want to do a video where I start recording from the beginning of the process. It'll be long, but if people really want to watch that, there may be some long, dead air in there while I'm trying to figure stuff out. But that might be interesting for some reason. So yeah, totally happy to do that. I think it'll be cool. If people want to see it, I'll do it. Okay, so now we have this next one. This is from Bud Phillips Music. Have you ever used the Sonix Gate? I have not, and I just took a quick peek at some reviews of it. It looks incredible. I'm definitely going to try it. I've been using, the FabFilter Pro Gate for a long time, and it's excellent, but it's definitely a very traditional approach to how a gate functions, just done very, very well. And I think there are some really cool new ideas and thinking and technology that could be applied to gating, doing what would probably be considered intelligent gating. So it looks awesome. I'm going to get it. I'm sure it's going to become a part of my thing. Thank you for mentioning it. Okay, then we have Audio Nebula saying, thanks for doing this. Don't know if you mentioned your monitoring setup for this mix. I may not have in the actual long form video. If you watch the highlights for it, I do show a picture of the setup, and you can see the monitors in that picture. I'll pull it up now. Okay, so there's the setup, and you can see I'm using Adam 7Xs in this monitoring setup. And the headphones that I use are Audio-Technica M50s, and those are the only two things that I was listening to record and mix this, that song, the round 2 thing. So yeah, that's what I use. I really like the 7Xs, and I've listened to this thing now. I finally let myself listen to it in this control room here in Vermont, which is, what I would consider to be the best monitoring I've ever had. And it really translates well. It sounds good here. It really worked. I actually really credit the A/Bing that was done, towards the end of the process for having it come out the way it did. That last 5-10%, I would not have got there if I had not been A/Bing. But yeah, so that's what I was using. Adam A7Xs. Okay, so now we have Eric Chesick, and asking, would you consider sharing the raw multitracks for this? I would, and I will. I would be happy to do that. This is what I'm thinking, is I'll put together a session, consolidate all the tracks, make it a little more manageable, and make that available. And if you all want to, we could do another mix competition. And what I thought would be fun to do, to have at stake, would be, the prize would be the Behringer microphones that I use to do this recording. So you can get yourself that beautiful case of 7 Behringer microphones worth at least $100 if you win the mix contest. So let me know if you all are into that. I'd be happy to do it. I'd be happy to make the the session available even without a mix contest. But I thought that might be fun to do on this one. So that's what I'm thinking. So let me know what you think. Okay, next one is looks like username J Reinhard, and it says, let's see, in the gain structure chapter, you mentioned that you thought that digital clipping was clipping your transients. I don't, and they're saying, this person is saying, I don't think exceeding 0 dB internally in DAWs these days actually clips the signal. Most use 32-bit processing. I did a null test on a track in my DAW Reaper to verify. I think it is more likely that any plugins that you had in the path that are sensitive to gain were oversaturating. I think you're probably right about that. You know, in Pro Tools, when you set up a master fader, it shows up as clipping, but you know, maybe that's just a way of letting you know that you're exceeding, you know, some version of digital headroom in the system, but that information may not be getting lost at that point. Because I know you can turn down a master, and what it ends up doing is turning down all the signal that's going into that master, so you're not turning down a clipped signal. But I don't know for sure, but I think you're probably right, because that whole thing was going into, a master auxiliary that had processing on it. So there was probably a fab filter, EQ. There was the AR1 compressor. Let's see. I can look at it right now and see. Yeah, the music bus, and that's the one that I was really concerned about. It went into this, to this AR1 compressor, this UBK plugin. And that certainly is adding distortion and coloration and stuff, probably based on the signal that's coming into it. So you're probably right. I think it was probably just hitting that plugin super, super hard and making things a little too mushy. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Okay, so then we have username Danny Depp. So this is a non-technical question, but you mentioned that you're trying to recreate the, as I described it, glorious modern rock sound of the 90s and 2000s in a strictly digital environment, or at least see how close you can come. Do I have that right? And then the question, why? I apologize if you've already answered that. Are you trying to infer that fairly soon the advancements in technology in digital realm will be able to produce an analog sound to most humans' hearing? So I think there's a lot of people trying to figure out how to capture the sound of analog equipment in the digital environment. There's a mountain of plugins that are focused on and claiming to do that to some degree or another, or at least claiming they're really trying to do that. And I think it's been an interesting evolution in the recording medium, because, I started when there was no digital recording, or at least none that was really available. And then when it started to become more universally available, and originally it was these really expensive, like Sony Dash machines, these multi-track, digital recorders. And there were a few albums that were made probably early, mid-'80s is when those things started getting used. And I remember, right out of the gate, there was, already kind of a debate about it. And I remember some bands saying things like, if you don't like the sound of digital recording, it's because you can't handle the truth, or something, because it's supposedly so much more accurate, and I think in a lot of ways they're probably right. But then, so that sort of went on for a while, where people was like, digital's better, it measures better, technically it's better, it's more accurate, it's, you're not suffering all this noise and loss of headroom and adding all this distortion that analog tape machines, just kind of unavoidably add. It's just inherent in the technology. But then there was a point along the way where people started to just forget about the numbers of technically how these things measure or test, and what do I just like listening to better? And I think everybody just started to realize there's something about the analog recordings that's just very musical and very pleasing. It's maybe not in every context, but certainly early on, when the options, like when you first got Pro Tools, there were very few plugins available. There was no plugins available that were trying to emulate the sound of analog equipment in the outset. And so just try and imagine at this point, if, you're trying to record in the computer and the only EQ plugin you have is this thing. This is what we had at the outset of this. And it was not great. It was not a great, satisfying experience. It was pretty rough. And so, I think there's been a lot of progress made in really, figuring this out in sort of every direction, because it's not just a quest to figure out how to make digital stuff sound better. It was really also the process of trying to figure out, if we actually do like the sound of analog equipment better, why? Why do we like it better? Because it doesn't even test as well. It doesn't measure as well. We know that there's things that are wrong with it. Why do we like it better? And it's been a really important pursuit and journey for the whole recording community to take on and try and answer those questions. So my little experiment is just another part of that process, just kind of checking in at this time, in sort of the summer of 2025, where are we at with all of this digital technology, trying to capture a recording that sounds similar to something I did almost 30 years ago that can have the same qualities and character to it. And, trying to see how that would actually pan out. So, and I would say digital's doing pretty darn good. It's getting so close, The biggest challenges with digital have always been the compression and the harmonic coloration. And those two things have improved just massively in the last maybe 15 years, whatever. I'm trying to think when I really started using a lot, really leaning on computers. I mean, I started using them in the late 90s a lot. And so, yeah, I mean, in the last 15, 20 years, it's improved a huge amount. And it's getting to that place where, I think it's possible to make a record on your laptop and have it sound great. Don't need all this stuff that I'm surrounded by in this room. You don't have to have it. It's fun to have it. If it's available, it does sound beautiful. There's things about the workflow I love, probably because it's familiar to me, but you don't have to have it. It's really cool how this stuff has progressed. But good question, and opened up, a sort of a larger question about this whole thing. So thank you for that, Danny Depp. All right, moving on. This is another one from same user, Danny Depp. Okay. Yeah, this was just sort of a funny comment. So, as you first mentioned that you moved your whole setup into the living room, my initial thought was watching Sting's All This Time video, which was recorded at his home in Italy. Surely on a grander scale, since that was to be a live transmission to be sent around the world. So there were dozens of carpenters and others preparing the stage and venue areas. Chris Bodie, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, turns to Sting in the middle of all this havoc and asks, "Does Trudy," Sting's wife, "know?" Sting simply shrugged his head in a no acknowledgement. And so the question is, did Grace know her living room was being invaded? Perhaps Grace's parents had the correct insight in naming her Grace. Well, certainly Grace knew that I was going to do this. And, she's a recording artist and, is very familiar with the pursuit of all of this stuff and just sort of the passion and desire that goes into chasing this stuff, and has no problem at all. She was super excited about all of it. She even commented on this one. And so it's certainly not an issue for Grace. And also sort of coincidentally, one of Grace's nicknames growing up is Trudy. There's a lot of people in Vermont that still call her Trudy, But yeah, not an issue for Grace at all. She is very understanding and supportive of any sort of musical pursuits. So, okay, so then we've got username DeSantler, I think. Regarding the Pulsar modular, the tape plugin, it may ultimately have not been the right tool for this specific application anyway, but note that its default setting with modulation enabled does round off the high end in a specific way. If you toggle it, the difference is pretty notable. The high frequency bias knob is also pretty useful to add that kind of high frequency energy you mentioned in the J37. Lastly, I've found the Pulsar sounds better when not driven that hard, i.e. not flashing red. As a result, it's probably better for a more subtle mix bus, bus type situation. And that's similar to what I found with it. I did find some uses for it in the mixing of this song, but it was in places where it wanted to be more subtle, and that ended up being on some of my vocal stuff. And it definitely sounded better than the J37 on, for that application. So it's, I hope it didn't end up sounding like I didn't like the plugin and wouldn't use it, because I did, and I do think it's good, and I do think it's useful. It's nice to have a different flavor than the J37, because the J37 one is pretty heavy-handed, and I think there are times when that thing is not subtle enough, So, but yeah, thank you for mentioning that, and I could clarify that. Okay, so now we have username Lawrence Ames. The question is, what was the send on the verse guitar swells? It sounded like something shimmery. I pulled it up to check, and there is a send, but it's not going anywhere. So whatever it was, I sort of abandoned that. And so it ended up just being what was inserted on the track. And so that was this modulation thing. It's a Waves Mondo Mod, which is just bending the pitch of it a little bit, so as it's sustaining out, it doesn't sort of get stale sounding. And then the main thing that's adding the sort of ambience to it is Echo Boy, a ping pong delay setting on Echo Boy. And so it looks like, is there any modulation on here? There's a little bit of wobble on here. So this is the cheap tape style. There's a little bit of depth, and so that means the delays are also bending in pitch, and that would sort of create the kind of shimmery chorusing effect in the ambience on it. And then from there, I tried to create a little more of a stereo image with it, with this Cooper Time Cube thing, and then there's a very extreme EQ, super high pass, and then boosting a bunch of high mids. So that was everything that was on there. There was a send, but it wasn't going anywhere. So yeah. Okay, so now we've got username Will STL, I think. Okay, it says, hey Eric, love to hear your thoughts on quality versus quantity. When it comes to studio gear, I've been going back and forth on whether I should save up for a few high-end pieces like top-tier mics and preamps, or go for more affordable options, which would allow me to buy more gear and have a wider range of sounds and colors. Watching this video, where you show how great results are possible even with budget gear, is definitely nudging me toward the quantity route. Thanks for sharing your knowledge. Yeah, I mean, this thing, probably the biggest takeaway would be that you don't really need to depend a lot on analog equipment, so investing in that is probably not as important as investing in plugins. I think it's really the plugins that make this sound happen more than anything else, I'm getting all of the color and saturation and all of those things from plugins. And so buying, a Neve style preamp to try and get some Neve style coloration doesn't seem really practical at this point. I mean, that would be a very, very expensive investment to make. And you can buy a plugin that does something that I believe is probably close enough, and have kind of as many of them as you want across your whole mix on all a bunch of instruments and all of that stuff, And so it gets pretty hard to justify. I mean, the only thing I would say about recording is that it's probably good to have you know, a fairly good front end for just getting stuff into the computer without any significant losses. And, you know, in this case, I was just using the converters in this Antelope box, you know. It's an Antelope Studio, an old version of it. This thing's probably, I don't know, 6, 7 years old, something like that. It's not the new version. And worked great. It's got 12 mic pre's in it, you know. And yeah, I felt fine with how it was capturing things. It all sounded plenty hi-fi to me. So I don't even know if, you know, getting a super expensive converter really makes as big of a difference. So, you know, I think my experience has always been, whether, you know, working with analog equipment or in digital stuff with limited things, that for me, it's really more about having the time to just fully explore and experiment and get where you want to be, you know? I mean, now with how powerful all of the processing is inside the computer, there's a good chance you can get there, you know? And it's just really about having the time and patience to figure it out and just keep experimenting and trying things until you get there. And so it's getting very hard to justify, you know, investing a lot of money in a bunch of analog gear, you know? I mean, I made this recording. I'm happy with it. It feels great with a bunch of 7 Behringer microphones that cost $100, you know? I mean, that's insane. That's ridiculous. That really flies in the face of this kind of like traditional mantra that like you can't make good recordings without spending a bunch of money on these crazy vintage microphones and stuff, you know? And so, you know, I would recommend going in that direction first, you know, and get things happening inside your computer, get that going first with, you know, not investing hugely in the analog side of things, and see how far you can get, you know. The analog side may become more of an issue if you're working on stuff that it stylistically is not as processed sounding as what I did, you know, because this is very heavy-handed mixing and processing of the signals. Not hugely different than what I did, you know, when I was using analog gear. I did a lot of very extreme stuff with the analog gear to do this type of thing. But if I was making something that was just a really like super transparent, organic, natural sounding thing, just an acoustic instrument and a voice, maybe, you know, a string quartet or something like that, it might be a different ballgame when you're talking about doing something like that. And I think that's probably that will be the next most from the least that I do. When I get back to California, I got to try and tackle that, because that, I think, potentially would be more challenging. I don't get to rely so much on all the processing, you know, to get where I need to go. So I don't know. That's my thoughts on it. I think you can get there without having to buy a lot of buy really expensive stuff. So okay, I get these comments. I like to just talk about them really quick, just to keep everybody up to date with this. So this is prod by JLW. Just paid via PayPal, and it still says unlock and pay when I go to watch. I apologize for the issues with PayPal. They're few and far between at this point. Maybe once every 100 transactions, PayPal will just throw up this pending thing on the website. The developers have not been able to pin down exactly what's causing this. I just sent them a message again. Hey, can we try and look into this again? Because what ends up happening is on the website, it says pending. In my PayPal account, nothing shows up. So there's no pending transaction showing up in my PayPal account. And so there's a disconnect somewhere between the website and PayPal where it never even gets there. And with all of these things where PayPal says pending in your sort of user page, just know that thus far, none of those have ever actually gone through and, you know, and made the payment. And so when that happens, it basically stops there and nothing happens, you know, it just doesn't go through. So we're working on it. I'm going to try again, see where we can figure out what's going wrong with that. I appreciate your patience with all this. I apologize that's been screwy, but we'll hopefully get it pinned down. But thank you for mentioning it. and I'll see what we can do. Okay, so then username JP is asking, what do you think about Soothe versus Pro Q4 spectral function? Yeah, it's a good question. You know, FabFilter stepped into the spectral EQ thing, and I've been experimenting with both. I'm still getting to know the Pro Q one. It was a successful use of it on this when I was doing that thing of trying to like clear out room for the vocal and all of the music. I thought it worked well for that. I tried Soothe as well for that same function, and on this, I was happy with Pro Q4, and Pro Q4 doesn't add a bunch of latency and stuff. I think when I put Soothe on there, what happened was some tracks flipped into that red delay compensation thing where it had run out of room to compensate when I put that on the mix bus, and so that's probably why I ended up doing it with Pro Q4. So it's a good option to have. The main difference that I noticed between those two is that Soothe allows you to get much more surgical with the frequencies that it's tucking in. And there are times where I really do like that, and where I think the Pro Q4 version would not be able to do it, because even on the narrowest setting, it's definitely not nearly as surgical as Soothe. So that there are some circumstances where I'll definitely still use Soothe for that. But if it's broader and definitely doing this sort of making space for the vocal thing, Pro Q was, plenty narrow for that. I didn't want to go too narrow. I think it's better in that context to be a little bit broader with the bandwidths on what it's doing, and it did a great job. So it's just another useful version of that thing, that spectral EQ thing. Okay, so now we've got a question from Billy the Burke. It says, I have some thoughts, questions. Your starting point sounds are so incredibly far from the destination. I realize this is a most from the least, but if you were in your Vermont studio, would you print the sounds closer to the destination? If this was a most from the most, would you do any pre-EQ to the sounds to shape the recordings going in? You said before that you prefer to compress during mixing or as part of the tape processing phase in your workflow? Or does it all wait for the tape processing? Also, as a person that's mostly been in the Americana world of making things sound especially natural, it was jarring to hear the leap from the recorded sound to the produced sound. However, the intensified mid-range is so pleasing. I do a ton of tracking for other people, but not as much final mixing. I feel a bit like I go for the best sounding raw recording that I can, and in a way I exempt myself from hearing it in a big blown up state. Yeah, it's a good question. And my workflow now is that I always make sure to capture things directly digital into the computer with nothing on them. And so I always have the option of being able to approach the processing of something differently if I need to. I love having that safety net. It was stressful when I didn't have that safety net, and I would kind of like get hung up at times just, overthinking and waffling over choices that I was potentially going to make and commit to onto a tape machine that I cannot undo, And so I love having that safety net. And so now I capture everything in, and then generally what happens is when I do the tape machine processing, it's really almost always invariably only EQ. For sure on the drums, it's only EQ. On other instruments like vocals, guitars, bass, stuff like that, on that stuff, I'll do some processing when it goes through the tape machine. I'm more comfortable committing to compression on those things. The drum compression I don't do it there because often so much of the compression sound on the drums comes from an overall bus compression that's on the whole drum kit or on the whole mix, which was the case on this mix. And I did it in a pretty extreme way on this mix. And so early on in the process, I I started compressing the whole bus, and it had drums and scratch bass and scratch guitars. And so I started mixing the drums into that compression. And it worked out really good for this. And then later I added that option of being able to blend between that overall compression and not, because there were some things that needed to not be weighing down the compression in that bus as much. You know, the guitars and other, the bass a little bit. Certainly vocals weren't going through that. So yeah, it's definitely on the drums. I don't compress them individually before I'm incorporating an overall compression. Like, that's just an important part of it, because there's a lot of times when that overall compression, whether it's on just a drum bus or an overall mix bus, gets the job done. And I don't need to compress the things individually. So that's my general approach. You know, I'll compress on vocals, guitars, bass, things like that, where there is not a bus compression element that really plays a huge role in the final sound of it. I'll do that on those elements, but with the drums, I wait until the overall compression is on there. And often I don't have that going yet when I'm doing this kind of processing, so just running it through the tape machine kind of thing. So there you go. But good question. Okay, so now we have username Calvin Lauber. As an idea of a future video, I would love to hear you speak about the mix process in terms of philosophy. Like, are you starting with mixing the drums how you want them to sound and bringing in each element one at a time? Or mixing with the whole track up and not soloing until you've got something going? Just curious how you end up with some of the crazier but great sounding balance EQ moves. So this is somewhat similar to the previous one. And so I definitely have to get a starting point with the drums. So I will start with everything muted. I mean, I will literally mute everything in the session when I'm really starting to try and get a mix together, whether it's the rough mix that I'll be listening to while tracking other stuff, or I'm just given a session and I'm just mixing this thing for the first time. Just everything's finished and I'm just mixing. And so I will mute absolutely everything. I start with the kick drum. Want to get a great kick drum sound. Kick drum is something that I feel like I can get a good sense of just by itself, in the starting point. A good, solid kick drum that feels really satisfying when I turn up the speakers. And then I start bringing in the other elements. So I will start with like the close mic on the kick drum, then start bringing in the snare drum. Usually the snare drum will get dialed in with the overheads. The interaction between the close mic on the snare and the overheads is really important for the snare drum sound. So I'll try and get those things working kind of in tandem together, and then start bringing in the other stuff. Do the room mics. That's an important part of the snare drum sound. And then usually I do the toms last. And so I get like a really good basic drum mix happening, and then I'll start bringing in other elements. Often what happens is when I start bringing in a bunch of big distorted guitars and bass and other things, I have to go back and make adjustments to the drums, because when you're hearing the drums by themselves, they're not competing with anything, and they'll jump out fine. They have plenty of punch and clarity and presence and all that stuff. As you start adding other elements, those qualities start to get swallowed up by the other elements in the mix, and I have to go back, make adjustments to make sure that those things fight their way through and still feel the way I want them to when all the instruments are going. So that's a quick sort of general idea on how it usually goes, especially for mixing this kind of stuff. But I'm going to try and do more mixing stuff where we're just going to go through the whole process together, and so there'll be more opportunities to really see what that's about, along the way. Okay, so now there's a question here. This is from Eric Emery Schulman. Is the mono snare room pointed away from the drums? Also, I'd like to request a video where you really delineate the art of balancing and how you approach it, even just demonstrating how balance has more of an impact on the mix than anything else. Okay, so the mono snare room pointed away from the drums. It was up in the corner, but yeah, pointing down is what I remember. It wasn't like pointed away at the corner. It was pointed down. And I think there's another question about this. Somebody asked for this, and I realized I made a mistake when I edited this video, or even when I filmed all of my commentary going through it. There's a really important video clip that I totally left out. I can't believe I left this out, but I made a video clip of what the final miking was and went over in, really great detail, showing all the positions and where everything ended up. I left it out. I'm going to re-edit the video that's on the website and add that, so anybody that watches it, from today forward, you'll be able to see it with this video. But I'm going to play it right now so you can all see this. I can't believe I forgot to include this somehow. So check this out. Very important video. Okay, final drum miking. Here it is. Well, I think we got a drum pass. I think it all worked out. This is what we ended up sticking with here. So we got the ribbon mics, kind of the same thing. And I always orient the mics, instead of putting them directly behind me and going this way, because the stereo image is really kind of between the two toms on this recording. And so I kind of center them between the two toms and have one coming out this way and one coming out that way. So you get a little bit of a spread on the two toms, and that seemed to be working good. The snare drum sounded nice and punchy in those mics. That whole thing is working pretty sweet. The only thing that I added was a mono room mic, and I did the speaker trick, put it there, moved around, found a spot up there where I think now I'm starting to settle that, like, for the snare drum in these room mics, it's really the sort of like 400 to 500 hertz thing that is really effective. That makes it pop out, like the fundamental is better coming off of the close mic. That's a nice kind of focused, low, punchy sound, but when there's too much of that 200 in the room mics, it just gets a little too murky, just kind of weighs it down too much, I think. So this was a very clear spot. I took a picture of it where that 450 hertz just went boop, nice little hump there. And then the MXL 67 did good out in the hallway here, It sounds big and explosive. Once I get a bunch of compression on there and stuff, I think it's going to sound really cool. I'm all sweaty. It's hot as fuck in here. I had to keep the air conditioning off while I was playing. So I think we got it. I'm going to tear this thing down. I do want to try and get just a video pass of me playing the part so that we just have that for reference. I sort of punched through this song. There's, some of the parts are very, very easy and straightforward, but there was one pattern that has this like sort of polyrhythmic tom part that's being played while you're playing a drum beat that was, not something I've done before, but, none of this requires the same kind of finesse as the other thing. Like this is all just kind of loud, hard hitting, just very consistent, very straight. There's no swing. I'll probably go a little heavier on quantizing. I played to a click, so it's just a more modern thing. So, all of that, I think, actually really helps, on this type of thing. So yeah, so do a little video pass of me playing the part, and I think I'm done with drums. Okay, so there's the video that I forgot to include. Watching it now, I think I could have done a better job of really showing, more of the specifics of the placement of every single mic. I'm going to do that better on future stuff. I realize that that's important, and so thank you for asking about it, because I had this recollection. I'm pretty sure I showed that, but I didn't. so there it is. Okay, so then we have this next one. Username Otlib, maybe something like that. Okay, 2 remarks could make it even better. Okay, so this is the same thing, more footage of mic placement. I understand why you asked the question, because I didn't include this video, and I think I can do even better in the future. Okay, if you consider using another DAW like Studio One, you'll discover that you have always on the top left corner the value of the control you're using, including the value of the 1084 UAD EQ. Yeah. Pro Tools is not keeping up with some of this stuff. And with option A, boom, a new automation track using this precise last control is added to the session. So yeah, I realize there are other DAWs that are just doing this better than Pro Tools. I was really, when I went back and edited this thing, I was whining so much about the UAD plugins. I don't know, that was a little much, but it does bother me. Okay, so this is now username CD Badger. I've recently had to do more and more stuff from my home studio with less tools, so it was great to get some ideas. I had a few quick questions. Your drum setup of having the hi-hat on the right side and floor tom to the left is so interesting. I don't know if you've talked about this before elsewhere, but would love to hear about what led you to that setup and if you have had any issues with it in recording. I'm a lefty who plays drums open-handed, but I've never been fully happy with that setup, nor have I been happy going fully left-handed. Just cool to see some alternative layouts. Do you ever use tape, either emulations or real, across your mix bus as a whole or across buses? Do you prefer to use it on individual instruments as you did here? Probably just a horses for courses type situation. But would love to hear your thoughts about where you like to use it. I noticed that you're processing the overhead and room mics both as dual mono signals with their own separate tracks, and realized I've been defaulting to treating them as one stereo track for a long time. Do you have any issues with compressors, etc., hitting the sides differently? Or is that what you're after? Would love to hear more stereo or dual mono in general. Last thing, not to add, really good. Okay, and then they're recommending to check out the Lindell 80 series from Plugin Alliance. Really good emulation of a Neve channel strip. Okay, cool. I will check that out. Okay, so yeah, the hi-hat on the right-hand side, it was really just to facilitate playing this part, because there's a moment in the verse where I'm playing on the hi-hat and trying to incorporate that, tom polyrhythm, and it was definitely not doable with my hand over here. And I had done this at times in the past when I was playing in T-Ride. There were songs, I had two floor toms on the right-hand side, and at times I had a floor tom on the left-hand side. I don't know if I had actually ended up touring that way, but I did have a hi-hat on the right-hand side, just like one of those fixed stationary hi-hats that I could go to and play. There were some patterns where just this having your hands crossed over just didn't really work, in that context. I think there was, because there was a lot going on. I had a keyboard. There was a song where I was playing drums with one hand and playing keyboards. On the song Heroes and Villains. There was a lot going on. I had triggers, I don't know, all kinds of stuff. And so in this instance, it was really just to make it possible to play the part, just not have my hands in the way of each other. The open-handed thing, I think, is pretty great. This has never been particularly smart to me. I don't know why that convention has stuck. I've heard reasons why it started, but, because originally drummers were playing this, what they call traditional grip. And if you're used to holding your drumstick like this, it's not particularly easy to play your hi-hat like that. That really doesn't make sense, And so, but drummers were not doing that. They weren't holding their drumstick this way in their left hand. So this didn't make sense to just play like that all the time. So it ended up like this. But the open-handed thing I think can work great. It sounds like it feels weird for you. You should know, one of my favorite drummers, one of the best studio drummers on the planet, in my opinion, is a gentleman named Michael Urbano. Played on tons of Smash Mouth stuff. He played on the first Third Eye Blind record. He plays on Motorcycle Drive-By. He's an amazing drummer. And he plays open-handed. And there's things that he can do that other drummers can't do very comfortably because he plays open-handed. It works great for him. So you should know there's a drummer out there that has really, really made that work and really taken advantage of the benefits of it. So I wouldn't just totally abandon that. Okay, so then, yeah, mono tracks for overheads or drum kit mics. Yeah, I've been leaning in that direction more. You know, on this particular thing, I don't think there was a huge amount of compression on those. And so it wasn't really an issue. I can double check here. So the drum kit mic, there is a bunch of EQ, and tape saturation, the J37 plugin. So on the main tracks of that, there was no compression. And the only place where it's getting used, there was compression, was when I had a duplicate that had a bunch of I was compressing it really, really hard and just, you know, blending it in to sort of have this sustained cymbal wash. So in that context, having it stereo linked was not important. And it is sort of a trade-off there. I used to be more regimented about, if this is a stereo signal, then it should be stereo linked to maintain the stereo image. But there's times when that's actually problematic. And I've been sort of drifting away from that. And some of it was really the benefit of the distressors. It's one of the things that I didn't totally fully understand, but that I like about the distressors is that distressors do, when you link them together, they're not like hard 100% linked together. It's more of an average of how they link together. And so it's more forgiving of when you have like a big loud floor tom hit that's panned all the way to one side. It doesn't pull down the other side of the mix, drum mix, in a way that sounds really unnatural. And so I've sort of over time have migrated away from this really literal, the volumes have to always be perfectly matched all the time on both the left and right side of a stereo room sound or stereo overhead, and that it's okay that they compress a little bit different, and that sometimes it's weirder to have the left side pulled down by something that happens in the right side than it is to have only the right side being pulled down and just leave the left side alone. So there's trade-offs there, and I think there's probably places, and it really depends what the source material is, you know, what ends up working better. But I generally don't think it's essential to have things stereo linked, 100% linked in the way they compress, you know, on drum stuff, you know, or in general. So, yeah, I guess when it's on a whole mix, that in that case, I do like to have it 100% linked, you know, not have the left and right balance changing on the whole mix. But yeah, on the drums, not so much. Okay, yeah. So this is from, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, Fidakite, maybe, username Fidakite. Okay, let's see. It's really enlightening. See how much of a difference mix referencing made to you. I did not expect that. Oh, and the vocals are very cool. Great sound and style. Okay. Do you think you will ever finish and release this track? You know, this one at the outset, the intention was just to make something, write something to record, but I'm happy with the way this turned out. I'm happy with what is being said in the song as something that I can stand behind. And so, yeah, this one might actually have a life beyond just this most from the least thing. One of the things that I'm considering doing with this as just a further part of this experiment is to go after this. You all can let me know if this will be interesting to you, but basically remix this thing again here with all the fancy expensive stuff. And so instead of using amp sims, I would use real amps for the guitars and bass and all that stuff. Make use of whatever expensive fancy stuff I have here and mix this thing, run stuff through the real tape machines, mix it with all the analog gear, all of that stuff, and see if I can beat the digital mix. The digital mix is good. I'm not sure that I'm going to beat it. I don't know. I'd like to think I could. But I'm very curious about that. It's an important part of this journey, you know. So like I've done the side of it where let's see how good it can get just in the laptop. Let's see if it actually does get better if I take it out of the laptop. So I'm considering doing that. If that sounds interesting to y'all, I will totally do it. I'm definitely curious about it. Okay, and then that would be an interesting step towards having this be, you know, a fully completed song. Yeah, I don't know if I would do it in this round. Like if I was going to do a finished song, I would probably re-record it, I think. Not sure. Yeah, we'd have to see if I could actually finish out an arrangement with what I captured, you know, in Topanga. Okay, but good question. Okay, so next we have username JD, and they're saying, not at my computer to check, but I think if you control click or maybe alt click on Soundtoys plugins knobs, values are displayed. I think the issue that I've been having was specifically with Universal Audio plugins. I'm pretty sure, yeah, I can see values in Soundtoys. I don't remember that being an issue with them. Here's Echo Boy. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, if I right click, it will, on my system, if I right click on it, I can see the values. Yeah. Yeah, so with Soundtoys there is a way to do that. I think in Pro Tools for some reason I don't think there is a way to do that with the Universal Audio plugins. That was really my issue. Okay, so now we've got username Rowler, etc. Okay, so the question is, do you think you'll do any more videos like this in different areas of your workflow? Yeah, I guess I'm not totally sure what that means, but because the process of recording this is my overall workflow for recording a song, and so that it really sort of incorporated the entire process of recording a song for me. But maybe, you know, like I just mentioned, when I get back to California in the winter, I want to figure out more ways to explore this most from the least thing, and I'm open to suggestions about it. I do think doing one that's a more sort of natural sounding recording would be very challenging. So that's on my list of something to try. And so yeah, I do want to pursue this further and figure out other ways to explore this, and see if there's other, you know, aspects of it that would be helpful to try and figure out. So yeah, just let me know what you think. Okay, so now we've got username Cougs. They're saying on the plugins like the UA 1084, don't you get a numeric value if you hover over any control or click hover? Waves plugins do that. Let me check. I got the session up. I'm in Pro Tools. Let me find one of these fine things. I'm hovering. I'm right clicking, I'm clicking, I'm double clicking, I'm doing things. There is nothing, man. There's just on many of these controls, it just does not show you any numeric values. There's no, I don't see any way to do this on here. Command click just zeroes it back. Control click, yeah. Yeah, I can't figure out a way to get it to show numerical values on these things, but you know, I appreciate any suggestions on how to try and resolve that. Okay, next is username Bittersweet. nice name. A few quick questions about the guitar room sound. Roughly how far away from the speaker do you place the microphone, and is it facing the speaker or turned around like the drum room mics? You know, I experimented with a few different ways. In that small space in Topanga, it was probably about, you know, 7 or 8 feet away, and I experimented with it being more diffused or pointing at the speaker. More diffused was better in this context. It's a pretty dry space because it is treated, and the sound coming directly from, you know, a monitor speaker is really not the same thing as getting the sound directly from an actual guitar cab, and so it was better to just try to get the diffused sound in the room, and so probably 6, 7, 8 feet away, something like that, pointed away from the speaker, either pointed at the ceiling or off to the side or something like that, just not directly at the speaker is what worked best for me. Let's see, and then next part is, was there any strategy behind using the studio speaker for this song as opposed to running through the little hi-watt as you did in the first episode, or was it just a matter of convenience? It was a matter of convenience, and I wanted to try something different. On the first round, I did try putting it through a monitor speaker, and I was happy with that. I was unsatisfied with it, and I put a little more effort into getting it to work this time, because there was things about putting it through the hi-watt, putting it through another preamp section of an amplifier, because that I just didn't have any way to put it through just a power amp into a speaker. I never acquired any of the tools to do that, and so I just worked on putting it out the monitor speaker long enough to get a result that was usable. You know, that's really what it's about. Like, If you're going after something, there is probably a way to make it happen with what you have, and it's just a matter of spending the time to figure it out, you know. And ultimately, I got something that I thought was useful and really sort of added some cool dimension, you know, to that weird sort of slightly twangy, whatever, surf sound guitar that was in those transitions. Okay, and then there's one last thing here. Do you have an overall preference for one approach versus the other? I think ultimately my preference is to have it go through a real guitar cab. You know, in this case, I liked having the limitation. It forced me to try and come up with another solution that ended up working. But if given the option, I would definitely just use, you know, a guitar cab, whether I'm putting it through an amp with the preamp section or just going through a power amp and using the, you know, the modeled sound and removing the speaker emulation and having that modeled sound from the computer just go through a real speaker. So I think that would be my preference for sure. Maybe next time I'm out there, I'll actually invest in getting a little, you know, power amp of some sort. Okay, so now we have username Arbel. Okay. I haven't heard you mention it much at all. I imagine we are probably on the same page on this subject. I don't like to use it unless absolutely necessary. I absolutely hate when you can hear it working, but I do use it, probably to a lesser degree than anyone who has ever used it. Haha. I would still rather hear something 1 or 2 cents off. Oh, yeah, the question's right at the very beginning. I missed this. Do you ever use auto-tune or pitch correction? And now they're sort of discussing you know, details about that. That being said, it can really be used very effectively for correcting small problems. I mean, the singer has got to be 99% there to begin with. If you do use it, great job. I've never heard it in any of your work. Sorry for the long rambling comment. Okay. Yeah, cool. Thank you for asking, because I did sort of skip over this because there is a little bit of tuning going on in this session. The way I've been doing it is by, you know, actually committing them or using the Audio Suite version of Auto-Tune to just write the region, you know, commit the region that I'm tuning and not touch anything else. And that also makes it so it's written in there. I can confirm that it tuned it right, and I know it will never ever glitch or do anything different, or when I open the session 10 years later and that version of Auto-Tune doesn't exist anymore, all my tuning's gone, you know. I run into that a lot. So I'm trying to always commit that stuff as I go. But let's take a look at this and we can see what tuning was done. I have no need to try and hide that. Somehow a phone call got through even though I am on Do Not Disturb. Okay. So the way to tell is if it on the clip name, if it has the little auto-tune thing in there. Okay, so let's take a look. So here's the verse section. And the way you can tell is in the region name. And so it would have this little AT Pro designation. And that means that this file was written with the Audio Suite version of the plugin. And so what that means is in the verse, only this last phrase had a little bit of tuning on it. And unfortunately, once it's committed, I close that Audio Suite plugin, and the details of what was being done is gone. Yeah, there's no auto-tune plugin actually instanced on the track. Okay, so I did a little bit of tuning there. This is the line, let's put it to the test. So that line got a little bit of tuning on it. And so when you get into the chorus, I remember the other place where I did some tuning. We'll see it immediately. So nothing here in the whole beginning, but once I get to this third phrase and I have to hit this high A, that is the absolute top of my range right now. Man, I have lost so much vocal range in my old age. And so I definitely did some tuning in here. And it's really just this opening part of the phrase, these opening syllables here. And so you can see this one got tuned, and it's this whole thing. And sometimes this is what I'll do, is I'll try and get a performance as good as I can, just singing it naturally as a main performance. And then when I do my doubles, I'll sing to that. And so I know if I'm not matching, it's because what I'm singing now
is not right, and the thing that I'm singing to was tuned, and that is right, and it helps me get my ear locked into what I'm trying, what I'm going for. So on this, what ended up happening is that for the back half of the phrase, I was able to sing the rest of it fine, plenty in tune to be a double, and here as well, but still, that high A was just tough, and I was just flat every time, and so I used auto-tune to fix that right here. And so all 3 takes got tuned right there. And I tried to do it in different ways to maintain the uniqueness of each performance because, if you watched the Beauty of Imperfection episode, I talk about that a bunch in there, tuning vocals and how to try and maintain the richness of doubles in there. And so I'm very careful to not over-tune this stuff. I just nudge it closer, but try and keep in enough of what was actually off about it, So that happened there, and then I don't think I had to tune any of this last stuff. Yeah, so there's no tuning on this harmony that comes in, and there's no tuning on the last phrase and the last sort of humanized thing that holds out. So that's generally how I approach it. It's on my list of things to do, an episode specifically about tuning. I think I'm going to be recording more stuff of my own here in this round in Vermont, and so I'll have more opportunities to do this and just show my process for tuning vocals and trying to have it still sound like a human being singing. Like there's the whole approach of using autotune where you make people sound like robots. It's cool, people love that, and that's a whole thing and a whole style of stuff. It's not my thing. I don't do that. I'm trying to still have the people not sound tuned, and I use autotune. That still seems to work the best for me, and so I'm happy to demonstrate that. Okay, moving on. Okay, so this person is saying, by the way, in your username Stanley, by the way, in your new Vermont space, do you still have the Drumbrella? If not, why not? So I actually typed in a response in here, but I'm happy to just talk through it. I do not have a Drumbrella here. I'm still just learning this space and getting to know it and trying to figure out if I really want it and need it. And if I did do it, so I don't have one, but if I did do it, what I would probably do is either put it in this nook. There's a little nook that's created in between these 2 isolation booths. And I feel like this would be the perfect place for a Drumbrella. There is a complication. There's a beam that goes right across here that wouldn't allow you to have it go all the way up. It would definitely be in the way of that. So that might be a problem. But this is where I would put it. I think that would make the most sense in this little nook here. So I'm not sure, I would definitely want it to go all the way up. To sort of eliminate it if I wanted to. But we'll see. I'm going to keep living with this place and see what it asks for. But so far, still learning it. I've been getting great drum sounds here. I haven't really felt this strong need. Oh my God, if I only had a Drumbrella, these drums would sound good. I just haven't come across it yet. So we'll see. Okay, now there's just a few from the YouTube highlights that was posted. So this is username Axel157L. Anyone know if Eric has talked about the kick and bass relationship and how to make them bounce off each other? I was listening to Rose Colored Rear View, one of the songs off of Grace's Mother Road record. That thing grooves like a mofo. Low end is huge. Okay, I agree. The groove on that was great. And I would say a lot because of the amazing drummer and bass player that played on those sessions. That's Matt Musty on drums and Tim Doe on bass. Man, they're incredible together. It was such a joy to record them on that session. But the one thing that I will say that I am definitely a proponent of, which is this, I've sometimes heard of it referred to as this like Mutt Lange type convention with kick drum and bass guitar, because that's really what you're talking about. I like it when the bass guitar is delayed a little bit behind the kick drum. And so the kick drum really ends up being defined as the attack of the bass notes, and then you hear the bass guitar fill in the decay of the kick drum, and that seems to make them work much better. If the bass is before the kick drum, it immediately feels pretty unsatisfying to me. And so I always make sure the bass is a little bit behind, you know. When I'm going through and doing editing, if I find a spot that feels weird or the low end doesn't feel as good, often it's because, oh, that bass hits a little ahead of the kick drum. I'll just take it, move it back, and all of a sudden, boom, you get that cool landing, you know, the way the low end sinks in when the kick drum sort of leads you into the low end of the bass guitar. So there is that. That is pretty consistent for me. So hopefully that's helps answer what you're asking about there. Okay, then there's username Blaniac. It says, wait, are we getting a solo Eric Valentine album? And the answer is generally yes. That was a huge part of the motivation, literally, for building this studio. I may have talked about it a little bit at some point, but it was when I was really, you know, when you get into your 50s and you start going like, okay, what have I done with my life? What am I doing here, you know? And you start to reflect on what you've done, and you start trying to think about, if I just like really just stop doing this, you know, or if I died tomorrow or whatever, is there anything I would really regret? And the thing that I started to feel, and this was a while ago, this is, you know, 4 or 5 years ago now, was that, you know, I made myself available and spent tons of time recording records for everybody else this whole time. For 30 years, you know, I did that. And I'm grateful for it. And I got to work with so many amazing, talented people that I learned so much from through the course of that time. I wouldn't change any of that ever for any reason. But, you know, along the way, there was always times when I was still coming up with song ideas and music and things that I wanted to try. And some of those things would find their way into the projects that I was working on for other bands. But sometimes they wouldn't. You know, they were either just too sort of intimate and personal to me, or they're too kind of weird and bizarre and, you know, not something that a band would just incorporate into what they're doing. And, you know, I just started to feel like I should do it for myself, you know. Before I'm really done with this, I should do this for myself too. And I would regret not at least trying to do it for myself. And so that's a big part of the motivation of building this place. And so yeah, the answer is yes. And it's going to happen in kind of a weird way where, you know, I have too much experience and knowledge about the music industry to try and actually make a record and get a record deal and have it put out by a record company. That's the worst idea in the world. Zero interest in that. Oh my God, especially now. That industry is collapsing on itself. It's a disaster. And so definitely don't want to do that. But I do want to make some music and be able to share it with people. And so YouTube and this website and all this stuff is created an incredible opportunity to do that. And I don't have to do it on a big grand scale and go like, everybody heard my music and I sold a bunch of things or got a bunch of streams or whatever. I don't care about any of that. I just want to make some music, share it with people and go like, whoa, what do you think? Is this cool? You know, like I did all this stuff and I thought it was awesome, you know, and have people react to it and just share the experience of making music with people. It's really fun. I love it. And so that's what I'm doing. And it's going to go piecemeal. I can't really just stop everything in my life and record an entire album's worth of music, you know, in one go. I can't do that for myself or anyone else at this point. My life just doesn't work that way. And so I'm just going to do songs as I go. And so over time, it'll probably accumulate and add up to an album's worth of stuff if I keep doing this. And I certainly have enough material and ideas and things I want to try that would flesh out to be an album. So the answer is yes, that's going to be part of this thing. And what's going to be happening now that I'm back in Vermont, I'm going to be able to dive into really going after what I would consider to be songs that I'm trying to perfect and put on a record. You know, this Most From the Least thing turned out good, and it actually might end up rising to that level for me. I'm happy with this thing, but that wasn't my intention at the outset. I was just trying to come up with something to demonstrate recording some stuff. But when I do it here, it's going to be more intense. Like I'm really trying to make stuff that I can live with for the rest of my life and be a part of my legacy of whatever, you know. And hopefully I don't overthink things and get too caught up in that. that I've done that before when you're really trying to put a stamp on it and say like, this is me, this is my music, you know, and put it out in the world. That can be an overwhelming, you know, prospect. So I'm going to try and not get lost in that and just try and make some cool stuff and share it with you all, you know, if people want to hear it. So I'm gonna make it either way, whether I'm the only one that listens to it or anybody else does. At this point, I have to do this for myself, so we'll see how it goes. Okay, but thank you for asking the question. I'm very excited to be making some music of my own. All right, so now we have username Paul Allen 6849. One thing I thought I would mention is that Tonex is not an emulation in the same way as other modelers. It's a captured profile like Kemper. You could, in theory, set up your amps in your other studio and create some captures for the next more for less video. I absolutely love this. Okay. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that again. I'm generally aware of that. I just haven't had the time to look into it and just learn the process of doing it. I want to do it. I'm very curious to see how it's going to do capturing some of my amps. So hopefully that'll happen in this round while I have access to all my stuff. See if I can come up with some cool captures for this thing. So yeah, but that aspect of it is really interesting to me, and I'm excited to get into it. Okay, there's all the questions. We're up to date on most Middle East stuff. Thank you again for watching, checking out the video, chiming in with all these questions and comments. It's great. I love having the conversation about all this stuff. And I will see you on the next one. All right, thanks. Bye.